Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Is always too much and creates excess expectations, as usual. Also because it was announced as something inspiring and getting the big picture. So that's usually something that you will expect, and not necessarily what will be delivered. But I will try to discuss with you some ideas about the big issue of impact assessment. That is the assessment of the social or societal impact of research that goes beyond the research evaluation. That is the assessment of the impact on the scientific community. This is still a big challenge, something for which we have a number of theoretical, conceptual, and methodological issues still opened. And I want to share with you some research, even in progress, so something even not yet published, in which we try to address the issue of impact assessment by taking and exploiting the data that are included in documents and text. So something which is close to your experience in the management of complex information systems to be used for your organization and institutions. So that's my goal for this talk. First of all, shortly introduce the notion and the problems about impact agenda, and then introducing the notion of users of research, which is one of my key points to be discussed. Based on that, I will try to discuss to what extent we can use texts rather than other methodologies to evaluate the impact, the external impact of research. And I will give you three short practical cases in which we are actually working with my research group. I'm from the University of Pisa in Tuscany, in Italy, and I'm an economist by training, by working with in a school of engineering. So most of my research is actually done together with engineers and information engineers. So we try to keep a strong interdisciplinary approach to these issues. We agree on the notion that impact assessment is a recent and hot issue. Hot issue at the government level, the institutional level. I think that if we launch a poll and ask you what are your institutions asking you in recent years, in recent months, it probably has to do with impact assessment. And they said a lot of work is already in place on research evaluation, but many institutions and many governments are actively asking more and more and more about, okay, what is the impact outside? This is on top of the agenda. This is also on top because some experiences have made this valuable with a lot of experience. And the starting point is a definition in terms of impact is for outside. I read the definition by the metric tie report. Research as a societal impact when auditable or recorded influence is achieved upon non-academic organizations or actors in a sector outside the university sector itself, outside the public research organization, outside any kind of research performing institution, for instance, by being used by one or more business corporations, government bodies, civil society organizations, media or specialist professional media organizations, or in public debate. As in the case with academic impacts, societal impacts need to be demonstrated rather than assumed. So what is crucial here is outside and used by someone outside and demonstrated by researchers themselves and their organization. So researchers, including me, tend to assume that we have an impact. And the more you're a good scientist, the more this assumption is strong, which is basically true. Good scientists do have an impact, but that's not our problem here. They do have an impact, but what we need here is to demonstrate, to produce evidence that this impact is actually there and can be communicated. So this is a real challenge, conceptually and methodologically. So if we look at the landscape, OECD a few years ago launched a measure initiative to tell the governments, okay, we are in a financial stress, we want you guys to invest more in research. In order for you guys, you governments, to invest more, be prepared to show the impact of your research to your taxpayers, to whatever can be interested in that. After that, there is a large number of initiatives, professional teams, conferences that go on this issue of impact. And if I look to my field, that is the academic literature on research evaluation, science policy, research policy, it's impressive. Until a few years ago, there were other issues that were on top of the agenda. And most people like me that studies economics of science, economics of innovation, were, what were the hot topics? Biotechnology or, transition and sustainability. But now in the recent years, you always see at the top of the most read articles in science and public policy, and even in research policy, which is the more quantitative and prestigious journal, on research evaluation, and even in the field of scientometrics, which is the techniques to do that, which is of course 95% dedicated to research evaluation and bibliometrics, you start to see a number of contributions that go into the external impact. Now, what are the major experiences? One of them is, of course, the British REF. The Research Excellence Framework is a framework in which the evaluation and the funding of UK universities in UK was made conditional on demonstration of outside impact. Initially out of 20% of the total funding, which is a large part of money, and the next exercise will be 25% of that money. So there was the first large-scale government initiative to make the impact assessment a normal, an ordinary part of research evaluation, to the point that they feel confident to allocate money on the basis of the rating of universities and departments in their demonstration of external impact. On top of this, and because the REF published all the documents that were produced during the impact assessment, there is also a large research that is going on to examine these documents. And the approach there was mainly peer review, that is panels in which there were some academicians and some practitioners, so representatives of the stakeholders, business people, government officials, municipality officials, healthcare and hospital managers and administrators and the like, or civil society activists, to evaluate the degree to which the research of departments had actually an impact on society. And then, because of the publication of the record of the impact case studies, more than 6,000 impact case studies, there was a rush in doing some text mining activity. This is part of the King's College and Digital Science report, in which they try to establish the linkage between the disciplines and the impact. And what they show is that this relation is far from simple, far from linear, highly complex and interdisciplinary, in the sense that the demonstration of impact usually takes inputs from different and disparate areas. So you can imagine, and we enter now into the complexity of what we are talking about. Because here is not that a contribution in an area of molecular biology has an impact on other researchers in molecular biology. This is the idea that many research contributions may have an impact on broad, complex societal issues. Because of this, there is a lot of research in the recent years, also for us that do academic research on research assessment and measurement, and we are, the technicians of that. There is a lot of excitement in addressing these issues. In Nature, in 2015, they made another text mining work on the REF impact case studies, and what they raise is a problematic issue that when you talk about impact, you tend to overemphasize those aspects of impact that are more easily observed and measured. And this is typically associated with technological impact and economic impact, which is, for example, a research producing patents or producing new products that go into the market. While it's more difficult, and in these documents is more complex to examine, the kind of contribution that comes, for example, from humanities, and in which the impact is less objective and less measurable. We will go back to this issue in a moment. To be honest, there are other experiences with less, if you want, published documentation, but that are also relevant for many governments. One is the Dutch experience. In the Netherlands, the government has a contract with the universities, and they negotiate the funding package and the goals over long periods, and part of it has to do with impact assessment. And also the Finnish experience is interesting. This is also extends to public research organizations, in which the question is to what extent they, when they get the funding from the government, they can add to their dossier their societal impact. And finally, I found interesting the Australian experience of one research institute in healthcare, which gives to the researchers a sort of progress monitoring system based on your system, on research information systems, to help track the progress of research towards a final goal of impact, the final goal of getting results to be observed and possibly measured on society. So what do we learn from this initial experience that is going on in some countries with variable experience, and certainly less general than research evaluation, the classical research evaluation, which is more diffused and institutionalized? This is more recent and more problematic. We understand that there are multiple impact pathways. So forget any linear, simple model of input, black box output. There are multiple influences that follow different channels, different ways in which research produced by researchers may reach society in some time and in some place. There are also different time scales, very different. There is no such thing as a citation window that we can measure, because the impact on society takes place not only with different time scales across disciplines, maybe 10 years or 20 years for health-related issues, may take less for patentable technologies, but is also variable within fields. So in the same field, you cannot establish a standard on the time window, by which you see an impact. You must be open to study and examine different time scales, including very long ones, which is, of course, another problematic issue. And also there are disciplinary differences in the intensity of knowledge exchange and in the forms of interaction. And I will show you a major difference between STEM and SSH in a moment with some data, and this is a key point. So impact is more a process than a product, or is a process of processes, if you want, in which you have several layers of impact. Layers means from the individual to the organization to societal organization to the society as a whole. There are also different stages. In some fields, the impact is easily identified and measured. If you look at medical research, there is a good literature that will show you that a good measure of impact is the way in which academic medical research is cited or not cited in the references of clinical guidelines. Because clinical guidelines produced by World Health Organization or by ministries at national level are based on standardized methodologies in which any citation follows a clear path of validation of that knowledge. So if your research is included in the reference list of a clinical guideline, this is an easily measured demonstration of impact. But what about debate on civil rights? What about political science discussion about, totalitarianism? Or what about legal research? Okay, so this is the huge heterogeneity that we have to manage in this field. And there is also another issue that is, we know from many studies that the impact is greater if researchers engage into interaction with their stakeholders early in the research process. So there is a general agreement that the model of I do research, I publish research, and whoever wants to use it, welcome, doesn't work, or is not effective. It's a sort of one-way kind of communication between researchers and society that is not effective. The most effective way is when researchers engage themselves into, let's say, even informal conversation with their potential users and discuss with them their problems and their agenda, not with a top-down approach, not by letting society fix the agenda of the researchers. This doesn't work. But engaging into mutual understanding and interaction. That adds another layer of complexity. So we need to go beyond traditional models of one-way communication, or a simplistic model of society asks researchers what to do. This doesn't work either, because researchers may engage themselves into interaction with society, but normally don't let society to fix the agenda, because researchers follow intrinsically what they know best, what they believe they would contribute more. So it's not a one-way model, neither from researchers nor from society. It's an interactive model in which the outcome is basically open. And there are, however, some conditions for impact. That is, of course, good quality is usually a necessary condition in most cases. This is an interesting research topics, but then we can discuss. But it for sure is not a sufficient condition, in the sense that you need to have some dedicated effort by researchers. in addition to academic work, you need to organize the early involvement or the early conversation with users. And also the organizational context matters. You need to have some top-level engagement, some strategic engagement by the top level of the institution to say, okay, impact for us is a priority. And also you need to have good research information systems to support the process. And what I want to show is some ideas about how we can leverage on good research information system to enter into this field. Now, if research impact is for outside, what is important, and this starts from the discussion, the case studies I want to discuss with you, to show you. Well, if you understand that your impact is complex, follows multiple pathways, and you need to engage your stakeholders early on, then the question is, any aggregate view of your users is not sufficient. You cannot say, okay, I'm for the medical practice. You cannot say I'm for supporting governments. You cannot say I'm for the competitiveness of the industry. What we need to do is to enter into a process in which you identify your users precisely, you target them, and you position in their way of working. So my first point is a provocative one. All kinds of research have users. So we tend to believe that the academic quality is something where users don't matter. While for impact, we think about the stakeholders. That's not true. There is a large difference in the kind of users, but all researchers have users. Some of them are implicit, some of them are explicit, or as we will see in a moment. So the issue of users, I think, is crucial to conceptually examine the issue of impact of research. So the problem is that the users of research for academic research evaluation are qualitatively different from the users that you have for stakeholders and for societal impact. And then you need different methodologies. So I will try to publish an article, so please cross your fingers for me, because the methodology is so new that I know that there will be difficulties in getting to my academic community. But the basic idea is that you always have users. But if you have research evaluation, the kind of bibliometric analysis that we routinely do, in terms of citations, for example, and citation metrics, and all kind of citation metrics, H index or G index or whatever, well, they're users. But what's the point? The point is that they're homogeneous. The users that you use for citation analysis are other researchers. Of course, the researchers are themselves heterogeneous, but by discipline or by subject category of main journals, they tend to read the same journals. They tend to publish to share their knowledge with colleagues. So basically, you can treat users from a bibliometric point of view as an homogeneous group. If you do some social network analysis or bibliometric analysis, you immediately see that. What the problem with the impact, societal impact? It's enormously heterogeneous. All kind of society may be interested in your impact. How can you define? How can you classify them? What about the boundaries? The boundary of the academic community is well defined. Are all those that publish in your journals, in our journals, by category, by and large. Then there are a number of statistical issues, we know, bibliometric stuff, boundary definition, all this stuff, right? But conceptually, you have a boundary. And because of this, you can do bibliometrics. Because of this, you can standardize the measure, you can normalize, you can build up indicators that tell you something true about the quality of research. It's exactly because you have a community of users that use the research, cite the research, then you can build up indicators. How can you define the boundaries of societal impact? It's fuzzy, it's ill-defined, it's a challenge. A challenge that can be addressed and solved, but for the time being is still a challenge because it's not as close or as well defined as the users, the academic users of academic research. Think about the time scale. You know, you use, and Elsevier studies since many years, the time window of citations. We know everything about when are papers cited, by discipline, by author, by whatever, right? What is the time scale of societal impact? Can you predefine that? It's society that takes up the research of your researchers. How much time is needed? We don't know, or we know with lot of contingencies. What is the forms of interaction? From the researcher to the colleagues, if you want, is unidirectional. I publish a paper and my colleagues quote me, and I'm happy. It's also, of course, two-way or multi-direction in conferences where we discuss, when we have seminars. But basically, all bibliometrics assumes that there is a communication from the researcher to the users of research, that are other researchers. In societal impact, is mostly interactive. It's not one way. You have a lot of issues. You go back to the research. You do something. You talk with your customer, not customers. You are stakeholders. You go back. You change your research. It's a complex web of interactions. In research, you have an involvement that is the scientific community. We all know each other. We basically in communities in which there is a lot of social interaction, right? This is completely different for societal impact. And also in terms of, let's say, conceptual model, why we can use a causal model in the academic quality. Because we can reasonably claim that when a paper, when a research is largely used by other researchers, this is because it has had an impact, an effect on the research that quotes it. So we can sensibly say a good research has had an impact on other researchers, right? While for the social impact, the notion of causal is a bit problematic. I do not exclude that, but most of the literature says is a sort of weaker notion that is contribution rather than causal attribution. Contribution is a weaker notion of cause because you have an impact with lot of flows, lot of contributions, rather than just one easily observable causal impact. So also methodologically, this is a different one. So there comes my approach. My approach is that we can deal with this hugely complex and problematic issue by making a theoretical and methodological assumption. That is, we use texts or documents, even to study impact assessment. And that's open a bridge between this field and the field of research assessment, also based on bibliometrics. And what is the theory? First of all, let's say a bit of big picture, and I thank your vice president for giving me the pitch on that. Some philosophy. Searle started to ask, what is a social ontology? What is social? Is social something that is separated from individuals? Do we have something that is social? And Maurizio Ferrari's had a development on that. And paradoxically, what they say is that, okay, social is a huge variety of issues, you know, from trade unions to law, from the money to the trade agreements or whatever, right? So what is common across all social entities is documentality. To be social, you need to leave a trace that can be kept in the future. The intertemporality. You need to put something, to inscribe something in documents that can survive your individual life. So documentality is the way by which we can see the society and cut across the enormous differences in societal elements and to study that. So if this is a philosophical, conceptual foundation, let me go into the more methodological. First of all, we want to study impact by looking at texts. Texts produced by whom? By researchers themselves, and this is, if you want, easier, because researchers produce proposal ex ante, and in proposal sometimes they tell you something about their expected impact, or ex post, for example in the ref, by producing their retrospective case study about whether they have an impact, or by users themselves. Now the first point is easier to collect, or you can do methodological work. The second one is more problematic, and we are doing research on that, but I'm fully confident that with some work that could be done. In some areas it's already done, and also in some of the services that are, for example, under Plum, some of these categories of user text are already included, but I think you can move towards a situation where you can classify in a rather reasonably well-done way many kinds of external text produced by users. But now what I want to introduce is the need to process this text by moving beyond the initial stage in which we, and most people have done, topic modeling. That is a kind of knowledge extraction from text by clustering and classifying on the content. And I want to introduce to you a methodology which is called a lexicon or enriched dictionary, by which you filter a text according to a top-down knowledge-based, domain knowledge-based kind of dictionary. That is a number of entries of words, of expressions that reflect a specific domain knowledge. And I think this is delivering a lot of interesting finds. So, and I will give you two examples. One is a dictionary we did, and my research group, on users. So we build up a lexicon in which all social groups can be classified across any kind of social entities in society. And the second one is a lexicon on advantages. So let me go this way. The first case study is a re-examination of the ref case studies. We did on the more than 6,000 documents, but we filter the text of researchers showing their impact in terms of users, group of users. Now, what we find is that, of course, 99.9% of documents mention users. Users, imagine any kind of social entity you have in mind. Patients, people, children, school, managers, administrators, whatever, right? And these words tokens are roughly 2% of words. But now it comes the interesting stuff. Most of the documents use very generic words. I hope you can read it. People, company, public, child, school. So quite general words, okay? So we said, let's move ahead. Let's do some progress. So what we did is, this is just a preliminary analysis, is to examine the disciplines in terms of the frequency by which they quote their users, okay? The diversity of the users, but also the specificity. Let me explain a little bit. First of all, what is interesting is that humanities are at the top in using words that refer to users. So it's not true that people in humanities don't have users and don't care about users. They rather are very prolific in describing their users. That, I think, is an interesting finding. Also in describing them with different words. But then the problem is, if you use generic words, for example, people, you may say, okay, but are you really, really having an impact? If your users are so generic, who are people? And then we made analysis by making specific tokens, in which, for example, people becomes more specific with this example. People with cystic fibrosis, or people, key policy people in UK government. It's still people, but it's much more specific, because if you want to address, have an impact on key policy people in UK government, this is a clearly identified social group. Your goal is to have an impact with these people, right? Then we recalculate this stuff, and what happens is the opposite. So disciplines in humanities talk a lot about the users, but when they describe the users are very generic. Okay? So this is an interesting finding. Now, what can we do with this kind of information? For example, mapping users. Suppose that your next reports, it's not only topic modeling about the kind of research is done in your research institute, but the kind of users you are talking with. Is that something interesting for your governance? Maybe yes, because then you can see the other way around. We do research, and our research has the most demonstrable, auditable kind of impact on specific kind of users. So you can map users, you can target users, probably, but it's too early to know, we are doing research, and probably there might be something to do in this direction, maybe developing user metrics. So this is a classical topic modeling stuff. Imagine to substitute, this is on music, and imagine to have a map in which you substitute this with the names of your social users. Is this interesting for your top level? I think so. Number two, we use a different dictionary which is based on advantages and disadvantages. So a lexicon in which you are much more specific about what kind of problem you are addressing and what a kind of unsolved issue or pain you are going to target, okay? I go fast on that, but just to tell you the intuition of what we can do by using texts and by having new generation kind of natural language processing tools. So what we develop is a sentiment analysis, which is standard in this field, but a technical one in which we do more analysis of advantages and disadvantages. We use Scopus as the main source, and in this case it's an emerging technology. It's a blockchain. This is what we are trying to do. And in doing this, you very fast identify and cluster areas of problems, areas of disadvantages. This is in this picture, in another picture, advantages, so that you can anticipate your impact if you address unsolved issues, issues that are open, not settled down, not solved in this case, by the technology. Okay, so how can you use this? You can, for example, identify gaps in existing research, or identify people that work on these problematic issues in research. And in all fields in which you have emerging technologies, this is a crucial issue, because if you can anticipate that will give you an advantage and give your researchers an advantage. Case study number 3 is a project I have in progress, in which a public research foundation, mid-sized, not very large, but highly heterogeneous internally with social sciences and STEM, mostly STEM, has a strategic goal of doing impact assessment, but the issue is that they don't want to create a new burden on researchers. So what we are studying is the way by which we could work with reuse of documents. So here the problem is that, okay, you already have documents in your research information systems, proposals, publications, of course, internal administrative documentation for example, European Commission kind of accountability, milestones, and interim reports, all kind of non-published material that you have inside. And what you are trying to develop is the way in which we can use, again, text mining techniques to retrieve and to reuse these documents as inputs of a narrative, as inputs of a story, because then the impact has to be a story. It has to be clear that. Then you have numbers and metrics, but if you don't tell a story of an impact, this doesn't tell your audience what you're working. So, final remarks. These are only three, short case studies to show how research is progressing. But part of this research is actually going into the direction of exploiting the potential of documents, rather than, of course, then you have peer review, you have all kind of traditional methods, but what you can do with documents is very promising. Now, researchers understand that demand for impact is strong. There is large awareness of that, but they also feel under pressure. They feel under pressure, and one typical reaction is, stop asking me something. Don't bother me with, with new administrative requirements to show my impact. I do research, point. At the same time, they really understand how important is that. So one line is to, and sometimes there is also an issue of lack of congruence between the top level directions, because if you don't make clear that you really want to engage into impact, then researchers tend to say, okay, my work is done when I publish, point. That's my only duty, okay? So you need strategic orientation of universities and public research organizations, but this strategic orientation is very much supported by the availability of intelligent or smart research information systems, by which you can leverage on existing documents, reuse them, extract most of the knowledge, and by this way, reducing the administrative burden on researchers, and at the same time unlock the full potential of their research, showing them how the impact can be leveraged. So these are methods that don't substitute for peer review or other evaluator methods, but are a strong support to make this viable and also more productive for both researchers and institutions. So I hope that this is a message that goes in the direction of pushing also the professional community of research information systems to put this issue of research impact on the agenda, knowing that it's still problematic for a number of reasons, but also highly promising, to be the truth, also exciting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this fantastic presentation. We have 3 minutes left, so we have, so it was spot on. If there are a few questions, we can take that. If not, Andrea will be here the entire conference and you can approach him.
Yes, thank you very much for your beautiful speech. I have one main question. Our institute mainly does fundamental research. So we have, I think, a little problem in societal relevance. Can you say something about that?
Could you go back?
Yes, I forgot to tell you that they will stay today and tomorrow. So if we want to continue the conversation, I will be happy to share. Yes, then we have to tell the impact stories the other way around. That is to show the linkage between pieces of knowledge that eventually go into the societal impact. This is something that people don't understand very, very precisely. Sometimes they see just, the breakthrough or the Nobel Prize in physics. But what we have to do, and this is something that is not yet done sufficiently, is to show that without the fundamental research that your researchers are doing, the final impact will be never available, right? And to go back, there is a lot of research by Adams in the United States that goes back from the breakthrough or practical applications to reconstruct the chain of contributions and the way in which, and also using semantic techniques, the way in which these advancements depend on previous research, some of which is, at the time of research was completely impossible to evaluate in terms of impact, right? And we need to do more stories about that to persuade. I'm personally completely persuaded that the impact of fundamental research is larger than other kinds of research, because it's more general, but the time scale and is different, and there is basically no possibility to anticipate fully at the time of research. But we can do the other way around.
One final question.
Good morning, yes, very interesting presentation. I'm from the UK, so I get the whole ref piece, and we're obviously preparing for the next one. One change, though, for the impact case studies for Ref 2021 is the inclusion with the case studies of the end-user corroboration. And that's something that wasn't there for Ref 2014. So the work you've done so far rightly focuses on the language the researchers have used rather than the language the end users have used. How do you think the inclusion of the end user narratives might actually help your work in terms of evidence impact after the next draft?
Sharp. That would be extremely valuable if we can identify the collection of texts in which users leave trace of the take-up of research. There must be something. It's clinical guidelines for medical research, but must be something in parliamentary documents or in policymaker internal documents or whatever. So we need a study about the classification, a kind of documents that record the use of research. And probably there will not a document in which research is cited explicitly. You know that in many countries, for example, in legal sentences, the judge cannot cite academic research. It's forbidden, right? But the language they are using, the concepts are clearly derived from academic research, okay? So we need to identify the documents and then do sophisticated natural language processing, text mining and analysis to identify that the research was used. I think it's a fascinating field. So if you have a collection of users, ask them to tell you the full picture about the documents they use, they produce. And in this document, there will be a trace. I'm sure about that.
So thank you very much. Once again, let's applause.